Welcome to Chicago Indian Arts Podcast. I'm Sarveshi Shukla, your host and board member of Chicago Indian Arts, a literary initiative by Jigar Shah with the belief that Indian arts, literature, and culture deserve a serious, thoughtful home, a place where writers are met as thinkers. Our guest today has spent 25 years writing most morally serious and emotionally honest fiction in American literature. She is a former journalist, a professor of English at Case Western Reserve University, and author of multiple celebrated novels. Among them, The Space Between Us, Everybody's Son, The Museum of Failures, Honor, which was picked by Reese Witherspoon for her book club, and now her latest novel, Missing Sam, published this year by Algonquin Books. She's in the middle of a demanding book tour, and she has generously agreed to join us for our conversation at Chicago Indian Arts Podcast. That generosity tells you something about the kind of person she is, and we do not take it lightly. It is a real honor to welcome Thrity Umrigar. Hey, Thrity.
Hi there. Thank you so very much for having me. This is an honor for me, and I'm so thrilled to be part of this. And the fact that you are putting something new and beautiful together, and that you thought of inviting me, that means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thrity. Delving right in, I want to start with something that strikes me about your fiction across all these years and all these books. You write people and characters that readers cannot stop thinking about. And it's not because they're extraordinary. I feel it is because they're uncomfortably and completely human. What is it that you're actually envisioning when you sit down to write a character?
It's a great question. And I think I basically try and make each character as individual as I possibly can. Yeah. And to me, what that means is, one of my core beliefs is that humans are flawed and complex and perhaps even contradictory. On the other hand, I also believe that nobody is a villain in their own lives, right?
That's true.
So even when people, we see that around us in the world,
Yeah.
Even when people do awful things, they always find a way of justifying it. So
true.
people are just bundles of contradiction. And to portray them realistically, I think I have to convey both their strengths and weaknesses, the good things that bad people do, the bad things that good people do. And in that kind of Bhelpuri mix, if you will, in that kind of hodgepodge, I hope that something real emerges from that. And the minute, I also believe that novels they have to have integrity. And what I mean by that is they have to be emotionally honest. The writer does not take shortcuts. And what I mean by that is, there is sometimes temptation to give a character a happy ending.
Right.
Because that might please a certain kind of reader.
Yeah.
More than, a realistic depiction of what would happen to them. These are the kind of pressures of the marketplace that you have to totally block out when you're writing. People
Right.
often ask me the question, who is your ideal reader? Like, who are you thinking of when you're writing your novels?
Yeah.
And I have an answer that's probably not very pleasing to them, which is nobody.
Yeah.
I'm making a strong effort to block out thinking of the reception to the book, how it'll be used or interpreted. I don't want to do that. I want to write in a kind of cone of silence because the marketing aspect and all that comes later. But my number one fascination as a writer is to create the most realistic characters that I can. I'm not trying to make them lovable. I'm not trying to make them likable. I'm perhaps not even trying to make them unforgettable. I'm
Right.
just trying to bring them alive on the page. Character development for me is the lifeblood of fiction. Plot, I don't worry so much about because the minute I put my characters together face to face in a room, and something happens, and that becomes the plot of the novel. But
Right.
I like to, before I start work on a novel, I like to know my characters as well as I know anyone in my personal life, and
That
that
is
means
amazing.
understanding their backstory, who they were, where they came from, what their greatest fears are, what their desires are, all those things. Now, all those things may not necessarily show up on the page,
Right.
but I need to know all that about them before
About
I
them.
even start writing.
This is amazing. I could just keep hearing it all day because the craft and the genuineness of it just reflects all through. It is fascinating. And I think the sentence that stayed with me was no one is a villain in their own story. It's such a
Yeah.
powerful statement. Very true. Very true. Something else that I notice across your fiction is that, like you said, you refuse to make it easy. The people who cause the most harm in your books are also always the people who most sincerely love someone. Sarah loves Pima and still lets her go. The gap between love and the damage people do to each other anyway seems to be the territory your fiction keeps returning to. And I would love to know more about that tension.
Well, I feel like tension or conflict is truly the lifeblood of literature.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to read a novel or even a short story about happy people to whom nothing happens, who don't face any challenges or obstacles in their lives. Like I always joke with my writing students and I say that everything that we wish for ourselves and
Right.
our loved ones in real life, that we live peaceful, happy, perhaps even uneventful lives, where there are
Yeah.
no dark shadows. You wish the opposite for your characters in a book.
That
You
is
want to
amazing.
throw challenges at them because that's where you see it's in facing obstacles,
Mm.
navigating through those obstacles that you really learn the character of your characters. And that's
Right.
always the fuel that drives a book forward. So we want that drama and tension to be. It's just one of those paradoxical things about literature. We are drawn to it because we want to see how other people deal with their lives and the obstacles in their lives. And perhaps we learn a thing or two from them and apply it to our own lives. It's not a bedrock of happiness upon which a novel is built.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's
Yeah.
the cracks in between. It's the cracks in the bedrock. That's where literature really comes to life and thrives.
Wow. That is such nicely put statement. And I think a lot of us I think that also becomes a reason I feel why people get lost in good books when they're reading it and they're immersed in that world. And you just explained why that happens, especially with the books that you write, because we're not trying to do something beyond this world. We're focusing on everyday people and then their lives, and this is fascinating.
It's true because even people who write science fiction, which I don't, or fantasy,
Right.
at some point they're writing something. They may do world building that's outside our recognized planet or world,
Yeah.
but we are still relating to the characters. I mean, they may not be human, but
Right.
they are given human qualities. I mean, look at the whole Star Wars thing. We can,
Exactly.
in some sense, see one slice or aspect of humanity in each and every one of those characters,
That's
even the
true.
ones who are kind of robotic.
Robotic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think, yeah,
So,
exactly. You're right. That is the part that relates us as a reader with these
yes,
characters that are completely machines
absolutely. We want to see humanity in
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 books
them.
we read. Yeah.
Wonderful. this next question is very personal to me. So, a theme that I see in many of your books, for someone who grew up in India and now has spent decades here, I grew up in a world that was nuanced and fully realized. And when I left, I thought I left a lot of it behind. I it took me years to understand truly what I had actually carried with me, not in memory per se, but in how I react, what I fear, what I don't say to the people I truly love. Reading Remy in Museum of Failures and discovering that he became what he most resisted in his father, or Smitha in Honor, where she's carrying her mother's wounds, not fully realizing or understanding them. I kept thinking, this is what fiction's really about, what we inherit that we cannot see. And is that a question that keeps drawing you back as you're working on different works?
It's very interesting that you're asking this question because, and I know we'll hopefully eventually get to it, but my most recent book, Missing Sam,
Yes.
deals with precisely this question. It's not so much, I mean, one of the characters is the daughter of immigrants.
Right.
So it doesn't address fully the question of immigration and immigrants and what we carry with us when we come to the different country, to a new world for us. But it's very much a question that both characters, both the central characters in that book, have to grapple with in terms of the baggage from the past. So I don't think your question is about immigrants, but I don't think this is unique to immigrants. I mean, I think all people,
Right.
unless they consciously work very, very hard. I mean, I think most of us either react, we all react one way or the other in adulthood to our childhoods. Some of us who are lucky enough to have had safe and happy childhoods might embrace that more fully, whereas others try and run away from that as much as possible and become try and do things differently than say their parents did. But this legacy of carrying things on our backs, in our hearts, to a new world is very much true, I think, of most immigrants.
people.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
How did Remy, in your mind, how did Remy become the thing that he resisted most in his dad? Like, without giving too much away, I guess I'm not clear on what you meant by that.
So I think there was, and I'll kind of relate it with more of a personal view. So
Yeah.
I feel, and the statement that you just said is somewhere a bedrock of it. Like we react to as adults, we are always somewhere reacting to our childhood. So I felt that with me, I had a very loving childhood. My parents were very lovely, but you go through this phase where you're constantly judging their choices for what is or is not happening in your life.
Right.
And that's somewhere where I feel the tension around in Remy, where and only after my parents passed, and they passed unexpectedly, it was this journey, and I think it was anger and grief and, not understanding that I kept on judging them that, oh, if only, you would have done this or done that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
felt that same kind of, relatability.
Yeah.
It took me time to get away from there and see them as complete humans, like
Yes.
allow them to be
Yes.
the humans they are.
Yes, that's so beautifully said because we all forget that mom and dad are primarily their own people. We
own
don't
people.
see them, as
Yeah.
you said, completely until we are old enough and have had life experiences that teach us that.
Right.
One thing I will say about your original question was, when I came to this country, I was so fascinated with this very quintessential American concept of reinvention. I mean,
Yeah.
it goes back to the Great Gatsby and all
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
But I just thought, what a country where, people with a straight face, I mean, genuinely believe that a human being can come here and completely reinvent themselves. And of course, now we are made to understand the dangers, the dark side of that
Right.
reinvention also,
Right.
because every time you gain something, it seems like one of those sad things in life that you also lose something or you have to give up something. You're making a trade. So, yes, you can reinvent yourself in all kinds of superficial ways. You might dress differently. You might,
Right.
cut your hair differently. You might speak differently. You can do all those things, but you're trying to get at something much deeper,
Much
you
deeper.
know which
Yeah.
is what we carry in our hearts. And that, I think, again, it's true for immigrants, perhaps more so than other people, but I think it's true for all of us.
For all of
There
us.
has to be a reckoning, there has to be a grappling with childhood at some point. One of the
Right.
things I also believe that helps me sometimes not be judgmental of other people is I try and think of adults as simply tall children you know
That's a good
that
one. I love
in
it.
some strange way that really helps me because in our hearts, I mean they've done studies of this, like they've interviewed people in their 70s and 80s and said internally, what age are you?
Right.
And they'll say something like 20 or 35 or 17, you
Right.
know. So we all carry that nugget of who we were because after all, as much as we can change, we are still that person.
We are still that person. That is so true. Like if someone asked me what my inner child age is, like a lot of times my key reactions when I'm in crisis and I'm trying to compose myself, I
Right.
feel like I'm in my teen years and reacting from that standpoint and not
Yeah.
someone who now has two kids and is living life and has moved way beyond that. But that is
Right.
I love the concept of adults as tall children.
Tall
That is,
children. I
that
mean,
is
and
fascinating.
the other thing, a friend of mine in India, when I get caught up with the political situation and how could human beings hurt each other like this and why do we still have wars and all that, she always says to me, humans are simply bumped up apes, you know? And when I think
True.
of humanity in
Yeah.
that way, it's not terribly flattering, but
Yeah.
it helps me get over my complete horror at
True.
what happens in the world, you
That
know?
is true. So fascinating. And incidentally, my next question is about Missing Sam. So,
Okay.
and I want to approach it as a reader rather than, having you explain the plot to us. Because I feel underneath that thriller, the question that you've circled across many bodies of your work is who gets believed in the time of crisis and who doesn't. And I want to know what drew you to this story and what made Alia the right choice to carry it forward.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, the novel is set in 2019 in America. And, it was a time when our country was extremely polarized, as it is today. And immigrant bashing was sort of happening in the open. The suspicion and hostility, suspicion at best, hostility at worst that immigrants were facing, it was just sort of swirling in the air. Um, and I think I had started writing the novel. Well, it would have had to have been slightly after that period because the novel ends with just the beginning of the COVID shutdowns
Yeah.
that happened around the world. I was also reading a bunch of mystery novels at that time, and many of them had a plot where the white woman disappears and the object of suspicion becomes the husband,
The
usually,
husband.
or the
Yeah.
boyfriend, the
Right.
partner,
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
who also is white. And nothing wrong with those novels. They were very well written. I enjoyed reading them. But I started thinking that the canvas that those novels painted on was pretty limited. They were sort of more personal and domestic thrillers, if you will.
Right.
And I just thought, what would happen if I sort of tried to blow that open? And if I painted on a larger, more political canvas that talked about everything that was happening in the country.
Wow.
So I wanted to keep turning the dial up and up and up. So I thought, okay, so let's have a white woman disappear. Let's keep to the central trope of those kinds of novels. But what if that white woman happens to be gay? What if she's married to another woman? And then the woman who's left behind, in this case Ali or
Yeah.
Alia, what would happen if she's Muslim?
You're right.
What would happen if she's brown? What would happen if she's the daughter of immigrants from India? How would the world, again, in 2019, treat someone like that? She
Right.
would undoubtedly become the object of suspicion, perhaps overt acts of, if not violence, then something pretty
Yeah. More
adjacent
serious. Yeah.
to violence. And then how would somebody like Ali, born and raised in America, who has always thought of herself as nothing other than American, she's only visited India once when she was 4 years old, has no memory of that visit, is estranged from her father, who is this absolutely loving, doting father, but who is a devout Muslim and rejects his daughter because she is gay. I just wanted to bring all those real issues into the mix and then see what kind of a novel emerges from that. Because I wanted to write about family. I wanted to write about your previous question about baggage that
Right.
we bring from our childhoods into our adult relationships and into our marriages. I wanted to talk about estrangement with parents
Yeah.
over differences, can those divides be bridged? And if those family divides can be bridged, then is it possible that some measure of healing can happen in a nation that is so terribly at odds with, one half is at such terrible odds with the other? And
Right.
what are the consequences of that kind of estrangement and polarization? I just decided I wanted to write a novel that explored all those things. So
Amazing.
I did.
Amazing. This is really fascinating, and I would love to tell our audience, please go get Missing Sam. It is a fascinating book. You'd not regret getting it, and I can't wait to finish mine. I want to ask you about the arc of your life, of your writing life, because 25 years is a long time to keep doing something seriously and getting deeper into it. When you look at where you're now as a writer, what has the change for you been like? Like, how do you personally review your evolution?
Yeah, it's hard for me to be objective about my own writing because two reasons. One is I never ever go back and read what I've written before. Other than doing short readings in front of audiences at book talks and book readings, I've never read one of my books all the way through,
Wow.
because
Okay.
I know why. I mean, it would just all I would see is what I could have done better. A
True.
line that could have been more powerful, a word that it could have been the better word to have chosen in that situation. So it would just be like the metaphoric equivalent of me taking a red pen and just striking out pages of the book. So I spare myself that kind of angst by
Of
never
course.
going back and reading. So, and also when you do read, as I do for audiences and things like that, you're also, not always, but occasionally you're remembering where you were when you wrote that particular chapter or that
That's so
particular
true.
passage.
Yeah.
So your memory sort of gets intertwined with what's
With
on the
what you
page. So again, difficult to be, it's become subjective rather than objective. So a little hard to do. But your central question about how things have changed, I mean, I think one of the things is, when I wrote my very first novel, which I think four people, all of whom I'm related to, had read, called Bombay Time, it really was very close to what I had known, the people I had known, not all of it, but several characters.
All right.
That was true for my second book, If Today Be Sweet. But the more I do it, the more I can move away from hewing close to reality or people that I actually know. Because my confidence in myself as a storyteller has, I suppose, grown over the years.
Of
So
course.
now I can totally make up a book. I wrote a book several years ago called Everybody's Son.
Right.
It's my only novel that doesn't have any Indian characters in it. It's entirely set in the U.S. A third of the book takes place in Georgia, in the South. Um, and I felt completely comfortable writing that book about a black and white character, the two central characters of the book, because I'd written enough books before that, and I knew I could do it. So that degree of confidence of like really being able to create a story out of thin air without having a crutch of falling back on something real, I
Right.
think that perhaps is the biggest change that I've noticed in myself.
Love it. And I think one thing that I feel a lot of our audience will relate to as well is knowing that someone as accomplished as a writer as you is also self-critical when they're reading their own work.
Oh,
So
yes,
that's,
yes.
I find myself doing in whatever little thing that I'm doing, but this is great to hear that. So before the novels, there was journalism. And I
Yes.
find that progression quite interesting because both are about truth, both are about seeing people clearly and rendering them honestly. So, what is it that journalism couldn't hold or was differently doing for you versus like what made you come to fiction from there?
So I loved my years as a journalist. I really did, because I always tried to inject sort of the techniques of fiction, of storytelling, into my journalism. When I got an opportunity to do longer magazine length pieces, and I was lucky enough to have most of my career at a newspaper that really cultivated that and encouraged that kind of writing. So it was great. It was like doing an apprenticeship for 15 plus years,
How
and
lovely.
it was a great experience. I don't know that I would have become a novelist if I hadn't had that background, because there
Wow.
is something about the fact of writing every single day that truly helps you. There's that theory of you have to do something for 10,000 hours before you
Right.
become really good at it. I really believe there's something to that. So it helped me a lot. But what happened at the end of those 15 plus years is that I started feeling this itch to tell my own story. Because the thing about journalism is I mean, you can only repeat what somebody else has told you, your
Right.
source or sources, onto the page. You can't make up anything. You can't, you're limited to by what somebody else is telling you, what information they are feeding you. And that began to feel a little constraining to me. Again, I wanted to just stretch my wings a little bit more. And, journalism is fantastic at giving you the facts.
Right.
And
Right.
occasionally you get somewhere close to the truth with it also, but not always.
Not
Usually you're
always.
just reporting on facts. And fiction can give you access to people's minds and hearts by giving some central truth about humanity in the way that you understand it. It's not an objective truth as journalism is, it's a kind of subjective truth. And there is deep, deep meaning and hopefully resonance for other people when one person tells that kind of a truth. So that
Right.
was a big. change and difference for me. And once I wrote my first novel, I'm like, this is fun. This is perhaps even more fun than journalism is, because I can really fly, and I can do anything on the page. I can have humans fly and sit on trees or whatever I want to do. The fiction gives you the permission to do that in a way that nonfiction slash journalism doesn't.
This is so fascinating, and I think a lot of our audience members who are from our era, the part that stayed with me in what you were saying is the grind, the hard work that goes into, and like you call 15 years of apprenticeship, like that's I love that thought process, because it just gives you that grit, that determination, that sitting down and writing, which I feel is a challenge today with limited attention spans and in our reel based world that we are living in. And something I tell my kids at all times, that you need to have this slow grind, days where it feels boring and tough and you just
Right.
endure. Love that you said that.
So I'll just add one more thing to that. The other great thing about journalism, daily writing for a newspaper, is that you don't get to be coy or precious about writing. You just roll up your sleeves and you get to work.
Get to it.
You don't, I mean, without mentioning names, I've heard other writers speak, and it's like, in journalism, you don't wait for the planets to align before
True.
you sit down to write. If you
Yeah.
did that, you'd be out on the street on day
Right.
two,
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it takes the preciousness out of writing. It is an art, but it's also a craft. And a craft is something that anybody can learn to do and get better at, And I have a really good work ethic when it comes to writing novels. I mean, you can put me in any situation, in any place, and I can write. Because I've
Love it.
written in newsrooms with the police scanners blaring in your ear and four
Oh my
television sets
God.
going on at once. And, you manage to find, again, that cone of silence in which to do your work. So I
Yeah.
think, I think it was a great experience for me.
Love it. And in fact, this leads right into what I wanted to ask you next. This is for all those people who would be in the room on Chicago Indian Literature Festival on May 30th.
Which
There'll
I'm
be emerging.
heartbroken that I cannot
I
attend.
know, we are
But
due. We
but
are
I
due.
promise I'll come next year.
We would love to have you there. It'll be an honor for
Right.
us, and we consider that promise taken.
Okay.
In the room, we are expecting there'll be emerging writers, and they may be at a very early stage. They may want to know, what does it take to keep going, to tell the stories that they want to tell. And this already feels like a masterclass. So what would you be able to tell us for them?
Okay. So I love this question because I do have things to say to younger writers, newer writers, people who feel like they have a story, but perhaps don't know how to tell it.
Okay.
I cannot tell you the number of times I've had people come to me at the end of book talk saying, I have this story that I'm just burning up inside to tell, but I don't have the time to tell it. And my answer to that is, how many hours in a day do you have? And they look at me and they say 24. And I say, so do I. And so does every other person on this planet, right? So it's a matter of how you organize those 24 hours. I mean, my great hero and model for that was always Toni Morrison, the writer. Morrison had a very important, she was like senior editor at Random House. She was raising two sons, and in those circumstances, she wrote The Bluest Eye, Sula, and Song of Solomon,
Wow.
right? All three masterpieces. And somehow she juggled it. She once said in an interview, she always made the kids a priority. I mean, she might be typing away at home, and one of the kids said, "Mom, I want a grilled cheese sandwich." And she abandoned her writing and she made the grilled cheese sandwich. But then she probably came back to the keyboard and the computer immediately after making that sandwich. And that's what you have to do. You know, none of us, our lives are so busy in the modern era. If you can write for 15 minutes a day, do that. You know,
Right.
look, there are two kinds of writers. There's the kind that talks about wanting to write, and there's the kind that writes, right? So you have to decide which of the two
Do
you
you want
want
to
to
be?
be. But also to be a good writer, you have to read a lot. So make reading, again, even if it's only 15 minutes a day, make reading a part of your daily process. Um, what else do I want to say about this? I love this question because I just really want to encourage other people to do this. Also, I mean, I'm assuming that the people who will come to this might mostly be Indian or South Asian, and I would say to them, we have amazing stories to tell. We come from a part of the world where stories are everywhere. They are
Right.
just hanging in the air. You know, it's like plucking a fruit from a low branch of a tree. Just pluck that fruit and tell that story because the world needs to know these stories.
This is fascinating because I think everything you said is so important and so relevant, and we all need to hear it from someone who's done this brilliantly over the years. Because sitting down and writing and just writing and taking, I love the phrase you used, taking preciousness out of it,
Yeah.
because sometimes perfection is the enemy. That, just write, just do. Brilliant message. Thank you so much for sharing that.
And sometimes you write when you're washing dishes, you know, write in your head until you have time to go and put it down on paper. Seriously, I mean that. Write in the shower. I do that all the time. I write when I'm taking walks. I'm not always sitting at a computer and writing. I just repeat the storyline or the dialogue to myself over and over again, and stop watching TV.
That's true.
Stop playing video games. You know, it's again, everybody gets the same 24 hours. It's a matter of organization and allocation of time, right? If you love doing something so much that you're with, nothing comes without a sacrifice. I mean, I spent decades of my life not knowing anything about the latest television shows and serials and stuff like that. I just didn't have time to do it because I was writing after I'd worked all day in journalism in the evenings, you know?
Right. I mean, prioritize the actual action over complaining or wanting to do about it. I mean,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
this is
Just do it,
brilliant
you
advice.
know?
Yeah. So you've been a part of several literary festivals, conversations for a very long time. I'd love to know which spaces feel meaningful versus the ones that feel like going through the motion. It would be a guidance or an advice for us for Chicago Indian Arts.
Yeah. So many book festivals, because they invite so many authors, will have panels. I would say if it's a 1 hour panel, which includes audience Q&A, announcements in the beginning, all that, don't have more than three panelists. Because if
That's a
you
good
have
point.
more than three, nobody gets enough time to really speak their mind or get what they want to get across. So that's definitely one of the things. I just attended a smaller book festival in Palm Springs that instead of having panelists, all the back to back events were one writer and a moderator asking questions.
Nice.
And I have to say, I loved that format. Now, that's more the exception than the rule. They could do that because they just had invited a smaller group of writers. But it really felt meaningful. And I think the audiences really, really enjoyed that format a lot also. So, depending on the number of people you're inviting, you might want to consider doing something along those lines.
That's a great point. And
And definitely try and match the writers, if you do a panel, according to shared themes or interests or preoccupations in their
Right.
work. Yeah, try and really do a good match between the panelists, because that really creates a kind of synergy that's very
Right.
good.
Right. That's great advice for us. And our reason to create Chicago Indian Arts was that Jigger, he's a very good friend. I've known him for a lifetime now. He built this organization with the view, something that he had observed for a long time in this area, in this region. Indian literature, arts, culture, in their full range, sometimes did not have a serious home that they truly deserved. So the intention was to create this platform where work is the point, where writers are in conversation, just like you advised, with readers who showed up because they care about the writing, they care about the books, they care about reading. We are intentionally trying to be non-political and non-religious as a platform,
That's great.
considering the world that you described being so polarized. So we're trying to bring the conversation to the center more than anything else. So we want India to be seen as a civilization, led, contradictory, just like the works that you've described, alive and worth taking seriously on its own terms. And that's what, is so consistently seen across all your works. So Chicago Indian Literature Festival, May 30th, is our first public moment. And I wanted to say to all our audience that your willingness in the middle of a book tour for a platform in its first year is the kind of generosity that makes something like this possible. We are honored that this conversation is happening in its founding year, and I can't wait for next year to host you in person and for us to carry this forward.
This is unnecessarily generous of you, what you're saying. I'm delighted to do it. I'm in awe of all of you. You saw a problem, you identified it, and unlike 98% of humanity, you are actually doing something about it. If you will permit me one personal statement here, I am always so disappointed that, after 11 novels, 4 children's picture books, my audiences are primarily white American audiences. Indians just don't seem to come out to support one of their own.
Right.
And the stereotype always is, unfortunately, that Indians don't like to read and they don't read. And when they do, they just want the literary equivalent of a Bollywood film. They want masala, they want, fantasy, that kind of stuff, that they are not readers of serious literature. And I am delighted that all of you are banding together in this effort to do it. And I really, really wish you all the success in the world. And
Thank you.
anything I can do in my very limited little way to help, I'll be delighted to do.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think you said a couple of things, and I want the world to know, to your point, a lot of people talk about changing the world.
Yes.
And Jigger, for him to take this initiative, and like he is a guy with a brilliant vision. And even now, with everything, juggling a full-time job and doing all of this, he puts in so much meticulous effort to everything for us to have this platform to, continue carrying on. I'm really thankful that, he considers me a part of this journey, and I'm glad. I can't wait for this organization to, bring forth more such things. And the second thing you talked about, reading, I think I see, I have to credit my parents to that because they were so intent. Like as a child, reading was mandatory. They both were avid readers. I remember childhood being, they reading passages of the books that they were reading at the time and I wanting to read it again. So I think that does so much to us growing up. And at that time, I can't say I loved it at all times. But now I realize the importance of it, that I love that layering.
Yeah, reading is a habit like everything else, and it has to be cultivated at a young age, I think.
So before we close, I want to ask you, you've spent decades writing stories that give dignity to people who've been overlooked, misunderstood, or judged too quickly. What is your hope for what a space like Chicago Indian Arts could be for those unheard voices?
Well, I think just what you guys are doing here is crucial to that effort. I mean, the podcast is going to reach people who otherwise, the podcast is going to be heard throughout the country. So that's a great first start. And by all means, think of inviting people who, for the festival itself, who write in regional languages.
Yes,
That
yes.
is a huge area of exploration that, we have not done successfully. I mean, there are some brilliant writers who write
Yes.
in regional languages and,
Right.
thankfully are these days being translated into English, etc. So maybe make those voices a priority. Um, I think you guys are really on the right path. So
Thank you.
the asking the question is in itself a great thing because that means you're thinking along those lines. And once you ask the question, you will find the answer to that question, you know?
Thank you. Thank you. Thrity Umrigar, journalist, professor, and one of the most necessary novelists writing in America today. Thank you for this conversation, for being part of our founding moment at Chicago Indian Arts. Your newest novel, Missing Sam, is out now. I want everyone to find it, read it, and celebrate all your work. This is Chicago Indian Arts Podcast. We are building a serious literary cultural home for Indian literature, art, and ideas, treated with honesty and depth they deserve. Chicago Indian Literature Festival is on May 30th. We would love to have all of you there. The details can be found at chicagoindianarts.org. Thank you for listening. This is Sarveshi Shukla signing off. See you all next time.